Welcome to the new Ricky Mathews Show, no longer referred to as Coast View. This is where we celebrate coastal Mississippi and Mississippi, for that matter, and the people who are working so hard to make this such a great place to live, work, and play. Regular listeners of Coast View sort of know what Coast View stands for. VUE is sort of a French term for the visual perception of a region, and Coast View sort of fit perfectly, as far as I was concerned, for a lot of time. But people tended to talk about being on Ricky's show or Ricky Mathews Show, and there was a little confusion about what view meant. And after over 800 conversations, still, as new people come to the conversation, they may be a bit confused about Coast View. Is this what's the difference between that and Ricky's show and so on? We decided, after months of internal conversation, that we would just drop Coast View and call it the Ricky Mathews Show. So this is actually the very first show under the new name. And I appreciate you listening here on 103.1 or on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast. We really appreciate it. It only seems fitting to me, actually, to think about, why I came to do this show after being in retirement. Still consider myself retired. I do this show from my house. I love connecting. The one thing that I miss the most about being a publisher is connecting with the community. It only seems fitting that I would have, for the first Ricky Mathews Show, someone who I worked with at the Sun Herald and someone I have admired for so many years. We'll tell you more about this guy here shortly. But before we go any further, let me invite my friend Tim Isbell, one of the most awarded photographers in the state of Mississippi, to the Ricky Mathews Show. How you doing, my friend?
Doing good. How about you, Ricky?
I'm doing good. Hey, listen, I've been looking forward, as you know, I've been trying to set up a time to visit with you. And in the second segment, we'll actually show some of the photos for the YouTube and Facebook audience. And for the radio audience, we'll describe what the photo is. But what's more important is the story behind the photo. And we want to talk a little bit about that as we delve into it. But Tim, to be reminded, of course, we worked together at the Sun Herald over all those years. We went through so many trials and tribulations together. It's just incredible how much time has flown by. But for more than 40 years, you've been a professional photographer, and people will know you from the Sun Herald. But your contributions to other media entities, you do a lot of freelancing these days. You've written numerous books centered around photography. You've been awarded just about every possible photographic award you can get. I should have decided to just do a full show with Tim Isbell instead of just two segments here. But it's a pleasure to have you on the show to tell your story to some extent.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good. Hey, listen, when you reflect back at your time at the Sun Herald, does it hit you how fast and how much time has flown by?
How fast it went, yeah, and I think my time was 32 years at the Sun Herald, and it just seems like it flew by. I mean, I started out, I was in my 20s when Vernon Matthews hired me, and I've always told everybody that I worked at 4 different papers, and the Sun Herald was the perfect newspaper for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was that for me as well. 27 years for me. That name, Vernon Matthews, of course, he was there long before I came there as an intern back in the early 80s. And for most of my career, people asked me, am I Vernon's son? People wanted to always know if I was related to Vernon. But again, man, all these incredible names over all these years. Sun Herald, though, I would say, prior to Hurricane Katrina, Sun Herald played so many important roles in the community to bring this region together. You saw so many pinnacle moments along the way, but none more so than what you and I were able to observe and what participate in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. What an amazing moment that was, to be reminded about the role a newspaper can play in a community.
Exactly. I mean, what I really experienced during that time was we almost had to be like psychologists to a point, because a lot of times when you're covering a news event, you get the picture, you get the story, and you head back to the paper to get it out. And people wanted to talk to us. They wanted to share their experiences. And we learned really the first day after Katrina that we needed to stay there and we needed to talk, because it was basically good therapy for people to sort of get it off their chest and talk. And it was important that, we were there for more reasons than just getting the story.
We were. I used to say this a lot, that newspapers had a vital role in society to help keep democracy viable. I said that in speeches. I believed it to my core. But it was after Hurricane Katrina that I really understood, maybe even to a deeper extent, the role that the newspaper played in getting sort of the situation out there so people could come to grips with it, going to these meetings and sharing what's happening in these meetings, as the whole collection of coast communities that make up Coast of Mississippi were really struggling with how we're going to deal with all the changes that were wrought upon us by Hurricane Katrina. And the role that the newspaper played is this harbinger of all this information and all these important democratic, I say democracy in action, and the role the newspaper played in that, it was something to behold, wasn't it?
It was. To me, that's what journalism is. We had a job to do, and I think we did it great. And we were blessed to have people come down and help us with Knight Ridder at the time, and but I knew the Sun Herald bunch could do it.
there was no doubt. Hey, listen, the support we were given by our parent company, Knight Ridder, was really incredible. Yeah, go ahead.
I hope we never see another storm like that, but I just don't know if a parent company like that could come down and do what Knight Ridder did. And, most journalists, when there's a big story like that, they don't want to go home. They want to keep covering it. And I know after a certain point, since we did have Knight Ridder down helping us, that we were told to go home and we had to recharge. I know when Hattiesburg had the tornado a few years back, and I knew a lot of the young photographers up there, I said the first week's a sprint. But after that, it's a marathon, and you have to change how you cover the news because you'll wear yourself out if you're constantly in sprint mode. And I said, I'll be covering Katrina to an extent for the rest of my life, so I'm just not in sprint mode anymore. I'm in marathon, and being semi-retired marathon now, that I still see stories, or I'll come up with an idea that could say, this is a little Katrina related.
Yeah, I talked about it the other day, that in my mind, for people like you and me and many more like us, world sort of sets up as a pre-Katrina world and a post-Katrina world. And the way you talked about the sprint that the employees of the Sun Herald had to sort of weather in those days immediately following the storm. But then you're right. There was a point where we began to collapse and reinforcements were necessary. From the press room to circulation to advertising to journalists and photographers coming in from all over the country. I have relationships with so many of them even today. I know you do too. We got to know so many incredible people. At one point, Tim, I said, how many people are here right now from Knight Ridder, at this exact moment? Because we tracked everybody. When they came in, I wanted to say hello to them. And when they left, I wanted to thank them before they left. But at that moment, 67 people at one time was in town from Knight Ridder. They were helping us find, trailers and temporary housing, and for 67 employees that lost everything, some family members. It was, man, what an amazing time. It was both sad and inspiring at the same time, wasn't it?
It was. I remember getting to my house, and luckily I had a house. I had about 14 trees on it, but it looked sort of like Robinson Crusoe's house. But I remember standing there going, how will we ever come back? And I knew with it being the Mississippi Gulf Coast that we would come back. And the Knight Ridder guys were great. I know David Purdy and I still keep in touch with Mike Cardew, who was a photographer who came down. And through the blessing of social media, we still keep up with each other, or we see what each other's families are doing and all that. And that was a friendship that grew out of Katrina.
You know, your books, you have 4 books. You got more coming.
Yeah.
Let me just read the name of the books. Vicksburg, Centennials of Stone, Gettysburg, Centennials of Stone and Shiloh, Corinth, Centennials of Stone, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast. These aren't just your average book. These are incredible collections of photography and words. On the other side, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you got into this part of your world and how you got so darn good at it. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with award-winning photographer, formerly with the Sun Herald, a former colleague of mine at the Sun Herald, Tim Isbell. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Tim Isbell, a former colleague of mine at the Sun Herald. And when I say award-winning photographer, 135 awards along the way, including 5 Pictures of the Year. There's a top journalism award we gave each year to the best journalist at the Sun Herald. It's called the E.P. Wilkes Award. He won that. He was part of the Pulitzer Prize winning team. The Sun Herald was awarded the gold medal for community service after Hurricane Katrina. Man, did the newspaper deserve it, and the many people who were engaged in that effort. But anyway, Tim, it's a pleasure to have you on. So your books, man, how did you decide you wanted to do that, and when did you decide it was going to be such a heavy lift? Because these are coffee table books.
I was at that time I was photo editor at the Sun Herald, and sort of with that position, I did not get to take pictures as much. So I needed a creative outlet, and any free time that I had, I would start researching, doing books. Judy and Patrick were at Gettysburg, and I kept saying, well, while this was happening in Gettysburg, this was happening in Vicksburg, because they were happening at the same time. And Judy basically said, you know so much about this, you ought to do a book. And we sort of looked at each other and went, yeah, I ought to. So it became one book, and it was Vicksburg and Gettysburg, and we sent it to University Press in Mississippi, and they didn't want to do one book. They wanted to split it out into 2 books. And I was at a book signing at Gettysburg, and I was telling the guy next to me how they split it into 2 books, and he goes, do you know how hardly that ever happens, where someone will trying to get one book and you end up getting 2? And he said, that's unheard of. And I said, yeah, I was spoiled at that point. At that point, I wanted them to always just go, yeah, let's do a book.
Well, it evolved on, and you've got a number of really important books that are going to come out. And what we'll do the next time we visit will be when you launch your next book, we'll bring you back and talk about the process that you go through to do these books. And you mentioned Judy, your extraordinarily smart wife, and your son Patrick were there together. But she's made a good teammate for you, hasn't she?
She has. She was an editor at a college newspaper before we ever started dating and getting engaged and being husband and wife. So we always knew we could work with each other as journalists. And I have a lot of journalism friends who their better half is also a journalist, and I think we just spent so much time in the newsroom or on assignment that it was just easy enough just to marry your friend.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I know it's worked out well for you. Hey, why don't we do this? Kyle's got some photos, and for the radio audience, we'll describe to you what we're taking a look at. What's more important, actually, when we show the story and the photo and describe it to you, is really the story behind the photo. So, Kyle, if you don't mind, will you flash up the first one? And just describe what we're looking at, Tim.
This is an LSU Georgia football game, and when I played football, I was a wide receiver, and I loved to get the catch. So when I became a photographer, I always said I was matching my talents against the talents of the guys on the field. And to me, I didn't have a good football game unless I had a catch picture. And you wanted to show faces, and you wanted that ball to be about 2 inches from their hands. And that picture right there, everything fell into place.
That's a great example. Over the years, I wonder how many football games you shot.
Oh, gosh. Many. Basically, I had 40 consecutive years covering Southern Miss.
Yeah, 40. And by the way, he went to Southern Miss. He went to the School of Journalism at Southern Miss. And I remember when I would go up there to speak to the classes or be involved in the journalism program one way or the other, Tim's name always got mentioned. He was always someone who was giving back to the university in different ways. Okay, so here's another photo.
This is sort of, The Natural was one of my favorite movies, and when Robert Redford's character hit the home run, the ball hit the lights, and he ran through a shower of sparks. And Bill Ostendorf, a guy I met up at a photo convention at West Point, the military academy, always said, see where your competition is and go someplace else. Well, at this game, most of my fellow photographers were standing at the 50 shooting the players running toward them. I chose to stand on the end zone and shoot them running through the fireworks because I knew it would be in front of them and behind them. And I shot it at a slow shutter speed to try to emulate The Natural and have the fireworks blurred as the player ran through it.
What a cool photo. What a really cool photo. Again, Tim this is why he's so award-winning. He has such an interesting eye for photography. What's the next one, Tim? Kyle?
Recently I shot this one 2 years ago. Slim Smith worked with me. The Columbus paper wanted us to team up, and he wrote the story, and I shot the pictures for the Vietnamese. I think it was the Festival of the Moon a few years back, and I was leaving, and as I'm known to do, I was still scanning for pictures, and I saw these two kids holding an American flag, and I whipped the camera up real quick and got the shot.
Well, and the Vietnamese culture is something, in fact, this next photo is from the series that you were involved in, but boy, that was a significant effort that the world got to see, isn't it?
It was, and believe it or not, this is the 30th anniversary of the Vietnamese.
Wow.
I did it back in 93, I believe. And that was the signature shot, was that kid in the hammock. And looking back on it now, the fact that I was able to communicate with people who really didn't speak English. And for 9 months, I was there every day, every night. And somehow we figured out a way to communicate, and it allowed me to get the pictures.
It turned into a 52-picture series that ran in the Sun Herald, but then the Knight Foundation, through a National Endowment of the Arts grant, gave the opportunity for the photos to go into museums across the nation. What a special opportunity that was.
Honor.
Yeah.
This next picture, you and me were there. That was Camp Shelby on Media Day. And since they weren't firing live rounds, they told us that the helicopters were going to come in like a hot LZ. And I crawled out to this guy and I said, do you mind if I'm out here with you? And he said, no, I'll just stay low. And, you told me later on that it looked like something out of Apocalypse Now, because I was running through smoke and...
It did, it's so interesting, Tim, because I remember the exact moment you took that picture. Hang tight 1 second, Kyle, on the other photos. But the moment you took that picture, you and I actually, this media day, we got into a helicopter at the Gulfport Airport, flew to the base there, and I guess it's in Stone County. Is that where Shelby is located?
It's probably still Forest.
Yeah. Okay. So, but we flew there and we got to see demonstrations of tanks and they had, war games essentially. And Tim, they obviously weren't using live rounds, as he pointed out, but Tim buried himself inside, this war game. And I mean, smoke was all around us. And I was blown away with what you were willing to do to get that photo.
When I was a kid, my father was fought in World War II, and then he was in National Guard afterwards. And I always played Army as a kid. So when we were out there, I was having flashbacks to the days I was playing Army.
Okay, so Kyle, let's see what the next one is. We're going to look at that one, and then what's this one?
That's one of my favorite shots. I was driving home late, and I was on Pass Road, and I glanced over at a trailer park, and this guy's front porch to his trailer was an American flag, and with the light on his porch, it illuminated everything. So The next day I went and knocked on his door, and he told me that he washed dishes at the Blowfly Inn, and he got off work at midnight. And I said, if it's okay with you, I'll be at your trailer at midnight. And he said, be there. And that's actually me shooting from the parking lot of the trailer park through the flag and silhouetting him as he painted. Once he got through washing dishes, he would come home and paint.
Wow, that's so cool. What's the next one, Kyle? Okay, this next one is a famous shot.
That's the picture I'm known the most for. I always say my best work was the Vietnamese stuff, but everybody knows the Brett Favre draft day picture. And probably the biggest misconception about that picture is that it's posed, and that is a totally spontaneous moment. I sat for 4 or 5 hours on the floor of his bedroom because I knew once this happened, I would not be able to push my way through the crowd. So I was in the room with Brett and Deanna, and when they said he's talking to the Atlanta Falcons or whatever, everybody rushed in. Well, I was already there. So it was worth sitting those 4 or 5 hours to get that shot.
It's been called the best draft day photo ever taken, and it's been in books. It's been on TV multiple times. So, hey, we could just keep on. But listen, here's what we're going to do. When you get ready to launch your next book, okay, we're going to have you back here on the show, and we're going to talk for an entire show about more stories, so many stories to tell about the process you go through, so many wonderful memories. Thank you so much for your dedication to Coastal Mississippi. It's been great catching up with you, my friend.
Thanks, Ricky.
This has been photojournalist Tim Isbell, award-winning photojournalist. When we come back, we have a couple of my friends joining us from Ukraine.